Our stakeholders and senior decision makers from the digital ecosystem are meeting in Cape Town to chart a course for the future of Africa's telecommunications industry. And to discuss the trends shaping industry, I am joined by Jorge Santos. He's the head of KPMG's Africa Telecoms Group, and Yaron Asabi, the founder, Digital Solutions Group from Cape Town. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I'm going to start with you, George. Just give us a quick update on the trends shaping Africa's telecommunications industry at the moment.
Well, I think a lot of what we see across Africa is certainly expanding from what we've seen in other areas of the globe. I think a lot of the investment that is being put on the ground is finally bearing fruit. We're seeing consumers adopting more and more smartphones, getting content, getting connected. And I think the whole story about Africa right now is how we gonna quickly raise to almost 100% penetration across the continent, getting people more used to more sophisticated services and capabilities, and actually using this for the benefit of Africa, of getting people across the digitization process and ensuring that we get the economic and social benefit out of this. So I think we're seeing a lot of push on new handsets, cheaper handsets, a lot more services that people, the everyday end user can actually take advantage of. We're seeing a lot of push moving into the rural areas, services that are specifically tailored to get people connected, to get people on board of this revolution, and this is basically where we're seeing the market moving.
Oh, well, Yaron, now one of the resounding themes from industry stakeholders so far has been the outlook for connectivity and how this will drive innovation in the sector. Do you share the same opinion?
I do. I think in South Africa specifically, we've reached over 140% penetration, and what we're seeing is a lot of niche telco players coming into the market. Mobile virtual network operators have recently launched in the South African market, where they combine their core business with the telecommunications offering, taking some really exciting value propositions to market. In the rest of Africa, I think that the MVNO trend will be coming soon, especially in countries where connectivity has reached close to 100%. That's when it kind of makes more sense. I think that mobile's impacted everything in Africa, from education to health to music streaming services. You know, the mobile is a multi-purpose device that allows you to make payments, study, look after your health. So it's really had such a huge impact on the economy and on the lifestyle of consumers that the adoption is really, really incredible.
Now, Yaron, you know, we cannot talk about the future of connectivity without looking at the prospects for the Internet of Things. What are your thoughts on this?
You know, they say that in the next couple of years, almost every device is going to be connected to the internet. We've seen a huge adoption of connected cars globally. I think in Africa, what tends to happen globally will happen in Africa as well, especially where there's such congestion on the roads. I think countries like Nigeria and even in Nairobi in Kenya, there's just so much traffic. It makes sense that there's going to be some smart transportation solutions that are going to come from Internet of Things. Health care is a huge issue in Africa, and we've seen some really amazing developments around connected wearable devices that monitor your health, or the ability to offer remote support for doctors where they can't reach the actual patient, to be able to do remote diagnostics and be able to gauge how they assist people on the ground that don't have the skills using the internet. And the whole smart home revolution is coming to South Africa specifically because of security reasons. So we're seeing a lot of great security solutions using Internet of Things, where you can access your camera remotely, see when somebody's actually entered your home, be able to control devices. And in agriculture, we've seen some amazing developments in Internet of Things, making sure that farmers are getting the right amount of water to the crop, or managing the feed of the cows. When it comes to livestock management, management, making sure that the right weight, and some really amazing developments that have definitely enhanced the ability to become more efficient and more productive.
Yeah, but Yaron, do you think enough is really being done for people to really understand the importance of technology and the importance of having to incorporate it in their everyday lives? You did mention something key there, agriculture, which is a key focus for most economies and most governments across the African continent. Do you really see enough awareness being created on the need to incorporate technology in what they do?
I think so. I think that sometimes out of need, innovation, actually the best innovations come out of a need. And we've seen the success of mobile payments in Africa because we're very much a cash focused society, so the move to cashless is really, really important. In agriculture, we need to be smarter about how we do certain things. So I think innovation that's cost effective. We also have infrastructure issues in Africa with electricity, so we've seen a lot of great solar solutions for base stations, remote management of your fuel levels. And generally management of infrastructure is really, really important in the continent, and being able to look after our natural resources. So definitely seeing both consumers and businesses as well as government wanting to adopt technology. We lack the skills sometimes, but I think that the market is developing very, very fast, and there's some awesome innovations coming out of Africa and technological advancements.
We're definitely going to be touching infrastructure later on in the later part of the program. But now, George, how best do you think African operators should position to monetize big data?
That's a very interesting question. I think a lot of effort is being put in creating new services that actually leverage big data. I think our view is more that operators should try and focus on actually capturing the possibility of, through new applications, actually correlate that data and generating value out of it. I think Internet of Things is a great example. I mean, we've seen here at AfricaCom the show where several providers are presenting new solutions where you have connected devices that, in essence, push data onto the cloud and allow operators to actually work on that data, use the power of the cloud, and come up with very important insights and feed services out of these insights, trying to make sure that you provide value to the end customer. I think a great example of what we've been seeing is the ability for users to get context information whenever they go into a shopping mall, whenever they access a certain service, about related information that might make sense for them and that might drive some consumer behavior. And I think there's definitely an effort being put up by telecom operators, by operators in general, and I personally think that there's an emerging group of startups all across the continent that are taking a very good, a deep look into this. And I think operators and startups will naturally collaborate to actually generate value-added solutions that they can bring to the end customer. So I'm very optimistic about the revolution and about the transformation that big data might bring. I think the fact that we're getting more and more people and objects connected allows us to broaden our imagination and think about new services and new solutions all the time. I think it's all about creativity, our ability to actually imagine those services and derive the value that comes out of them, because technology in essence is available, and I think that's the key message. I think one needs to think how to tailor this to the specific needs of people in Africa. And I mean, to my knowledge, and I've traveled tremendously across Africa, today the revolution is about how we actually bring new services to people that are not in the main cities. I think we've seen services developing, focusing on what's happening in the main cities. But just as was mentioned, I think agricultural applications, logistical applications, all of these will benefit from the investment that's being made in big data by most of the operators, and the focus that is being given by startups across the continent.
Well, that's a pretty interesting point. You mentioned them. I'm going to ask Yaron this question. Now, of course, talking about, value-added services here, disruption, of course, is a common theme in the industry. Now, how best do you think players can guard against, obsolescence in the future?
Well, I think in Africa, we've got a limited spend from consumers. And as I mentioned earlier, the phone would generally be the first device that consumers connect to the internet. And there's a need to use big data to actually contextualize personalized services, but also there's an opportunity to create ad-supported models, very similar to how Google and Facebook offer you either free content or free services like Gmail in view of their attention span and getting advertising revenue. I think there's a big opportunity for mobile network operators to launch new services that are supported by brands in a sponsorship model or an ad-supported model. In South Africa, for example, and in Nigeria, please call me type advertising is really, really popular, where you can tag a message when I send a free please call me USSD message on the network, and you tag a relevant contextual advert. What's really becoming popular as people are adopting smartphones, which was mentioned earlier, is really the use of rich media on internet. And I think that mobile as a media channel will become a very, very important aspect. It's got the highest reach. It's a very rich one-to-one interface, very personalized device that you could introduce a lot of value-added services that are ad-supported and allows brands to get in touch with consumers. The operators sit with the largest customer bases in Africa, and if they can help advertisers or brands or large corporates, banks get in touch with those consumers using the channel, I think there's some great revenue opportunities and some great new services that can be brought into the market that are specific for the African market.
Well, that's an interesting point you just made there. Well, if you're just joining us, I've been speaking with Jorge Santos, the head of KPMG's Africa Telecoms Group, and Yaron Asabi, the founder, Digital Solution Group. And we've been talking about trends shaping Africa's telecoms industry. And still in our discussion on the trends shaping the telecoms industry, my guests are Jorge Santos. He's the head of KPMG's Africa Telecoms Group, and Yaron Asabi, the founder, Digital Solutions Group. And just before we move on to talking about what will drive adoption of mobile-based services, I'd like to ask Jorge this question. Now, looking at the type of deals expected in the industry in the near future, I mean, this year we saw Nigerian-based IHS, the Telecoms Infrastructure Group, raise about $2.6 billion in equity and debt. Now, the largest African raising, if you ask me, since the start of 2008 financial crisis. Now, could we see more deals of this size soon?
I would certainly expect so. I think that the telecoms business is moving towards an infrastructure business, more to the dislike of some operators around the world. I think there's a huge fight around building new services and driving content to end users. But in essence, this is an infrastructure business. It has always been an infrastructure business. And telecom companies are being pushed by the OTT players to become more and more utilities and infrastructure companies rather than service providers. I think we'll see this this movement and deals like this growing and growing at least for the next 3 to 5 years. As interest rates remain relatively low, and obviously, I mean, one should expect that new players actually come into the picture because there's definitely appetite for infrastructure, for how to manage that infrastructure, and telecom operators will be pressured to, in fact, on one side keep investing, but on the other side lowering their total costs and getting a better return on capital assets. So yes, I mean, definitely we will see these type of deals shaping across the continent. I think the one that you mentioned is just a very good example of what we're going to see going forward.
Yeah, well, Jorge, now looking at the future of mobile-based services, now what would you say could be the key driver for adoption of mobile-based services?
I'm a firm believer that that video is in fact what's going to drive on the long-term services for broadband mobile. Obviously, we don't have the infrastructure in Africa to push those type of services as of yet. So I think during the next few years, we will see a lot of investment in content-based services, but one needs to realize that most of what's being done in terms of getting people on board of the connected world is in fact moving people from not being connected to being connected, and then to start using devices that can really get them the services and the complexity that you can get from it. So I would say, I mean, a good example, I mean, Nigeria this year, you have 100 million people that actually use mobile internet. I mean, that's amazing. That's something that we would not expect it a few years ago, and right now it's a reality. Most of these people are looking for new services, rich content services. Video is coming up. Obviously, in the main cities where you have the coverage and the ability to provide these services, this is already very relevant here in South Africa for sure, but we'll see more and more of this. I think video is definitely where people want to go, and all of the big services we're seeing popping up around the world will be in Africa, and most of these will be video-based services.
All right, great. Yaro, now would you say the future of mobile broadband could be the game changer for the industry?
Most definitely. I think that many different verticals will be impacted dramatically by internet adoption, and specifically broadband. So to build on what George was saying around video, you know, if you look at the education sector, the ability to do virtual classrooms and get content delivered to people's devices from anywhere so they can self-study, you know, access, you know, great portals like Coursera or TED or Khan Institute, Khan Academy, the ability to deliver content and communicate with doctors and nurses, as I was saying earlier. Really, Africa is just such a big geography, and telecommunications so important to be able to, just like the world has become a global village, and while you're traveling you can do WhatsApp calling and use a whole bunch of over-the-top services that make it very cost-effective for you to keep in touch with your family. I think for Africa it's even more important because we're coming off a very low base of education, there's high unemployment, so there's going to be a lot of wonderful digital opportunities and transformation in the digital ecosystem to accommodate a lot more jobs, and I think investment's got to be made there. And certainly from a financial services perspective, as I mentioned earlier, there's amazing fintech innovations that can come in apart from just payment or money transfer around how you bundle insurance with connected devices and get better intelligence to reduce premiums, how you can, for example, enhance security, how you could enhance using mobile devices, the ability to offer NFC type payments, as we've seen Apple Pay launch globally. I think NFC is really going to take off in Africa over the next few years because we're going to leapfrog technologies and adopt them very, very quickly. And in Europe it's become quite big, but I think in Africa there's a huge opportunity to move towards a cashless society using the latest technologies that are available right now. So a variety of very, very exciting services driven by broadband that were not available before. There's going to be a range of new SME businesses that are going to emerge in an ecosystem that I think is going to flourish. There's a direct correlation between internet penetration and GDP growth. So generally when there's high internet penetration, the economy naturally grows.
Well, it's really interesting you should mention this because analysts at Ovum say they expect the number of mobile broadband connections in Africa to reach 1 billion. That's up 147 million last year. Now, they also say they expect the rollout of more 3G CDMA and 4G LTE networks to drive this, as well as the increasing affordability of smartphones and data services. Do you agree with this projection?
Absolutely. I think that as the network operators are moving beyond basic services, which were primarily voice-driven, and they're getting pressure on voice average spend per user, the price is coming down. They need to reinvent themselves to be more relevant to a digital service provider with a range of digital services. And as we mentioned earlier, they've got access to this vast client base. So if they could add value, become more lifestyle orientated for the consumer, really help them from a cloud-based perspective, so provide infrastructure where information could be accessed from a mobile device but is actually actually stored in the cloud. I think that's the right model for Africa. It's huge everywhere else in the world, but in Africa it's even more relevant because we've got low IT maturity levels, especially in the small medium enterprises and consumer space, and all these cloud-based services with mobile access are going to be really, really important for the operators, and they can get incremental additional wallet share through data services. We've already seen the average spend per user in South Africa shifting more towards data than voice, and with a lot of services that like WhatsApp, Skype, voice is actually data. So the big focus going forward by all the operators, they're all upgrading their base stations to be able to provide a really great broadband experience. When you come off a low base of fixed infrastructure, it makes sense that mobile broadband would be the key to opening the internet market in Africa.
All right. Now, George, looking at the likely sources of future revenue, the wearables category seems to be gaining traction globally. Now, how do we see this trend playing out in Africa?
Well, I think wearables are just an instance of the Internet of Things. I obviously think that most applications that we've seen are more related with end customers on things like people that have specific apps that need to connect to oneself and take information out of that and correlate that information and process that. I think for Africa, it's actually the more important component is associated with not necessarily with wearables, but the ability to connect objects and track them wherever they are. I think both, like Aaron said, I mean, for security reasons, for logistic challenges that we have in Africa that don't exist elsewhere, definitely that's where I see the market develop. I think going forward, this is the focus that mobile network operators will be giving to this. Is basically they want to provide infrastructure that can be accessible and affordable to people. They want to provide great services that companies and enterprises will value and allow them to invest. And obviously, I think there's definitely a space here. Mainly, if we think about, for instance, security forces, that's an area where I see wearables being very much an option, helping security forces to deal with certain challenges that you have on the ground, the ability to have them connected and to real-time interact with the people from command center. I mean, those are good examples of where I see wearables being used. So more, I would say, on a community relation, governmental perspective, rather than on end users.
That's a very interesting point you just raised there, George. I'd like to bring in Yaron at this point. Now, Yaron, in exploring new models for increased efficiency, and cost reduction, how do you think African operators can transform the landscape? Just in a nutshell, we're running out of time.
So infrastructure sharing is becoming a very big trend. It's also better for the environment. So a lot of the operators are now selling off the infrastructure or sharing base stations. It makes a lot of sense for them to do that, as long as they can get the same quality of service of managing the infrastructure themselves. In terms of efficiency, I think investing in startups and doing smart partnerships with digital players that can add value to the subscriber base. And we spoke about big data earlier, really capitalizing on the information that they have about subscribers to be able to deliver more personalized, contextualized services, not only directly from the operator, but from different service providers and corporates around the economy that want to communicate with those subscribers. Entity Docomo in Japan is a great example of how they created an unbelievable ecosystem for their clients with a very high revenue share for the partner, and generated additional non-telco traditional revenue by using their data smartly and being able to really create an ecosystem around their customers and building unique services around for their customers.
Well, Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time today. Very interesting points you did raise there on the program today. Well, I've been speaking with Jorge Santos, head of KPMG Africa's Telecoms Group, and Yaron Asabi, founder, Digital Solutions Group.